Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you today. My name is Gaël de Boissard. I am the CEO for Europe, Middle East, and Africa of Credit Suisse, based in London. And it is a great privilege and a pleasure today to be able to introduce our first guest speaker, a preeminent European and perhaps the most distinguished central banker of our time, Mr. Jean-Claude Trichet. You will remember Mr. Trichet for his years as governor of the Bank of France in the years preceding the introduction and following of the euro, and of course for his tenure as president of the European Central Bank from 2003 to 2011. Such was his influence in the role that by 2007, the Financial Times had named Mr. Trichet the Person of the Year. And in 2008, for his work in the financial crisis, he was named by Newsweek the top 5 most influential, most powerful people in the world, alongside Chairman Bernanke. Of course, Mr. Trichet had the unenviable pleasure of dealing with the beginning of the European sovereign debt crisis, and many of his resolute actions then contained the crisis and set the stage for the actions and measures that followed to contain and stabilize the financial markets. Today, Mr. Trichet is involved in many pursuits, including a board member of EADS, and is the chair of the Group of 30, amongst other occupations. A few years later, the situation facing the eurozone is still far from certain. We were reminded with the Italian elections of the political issues and the deadlock that followed. Mr. Trichet commented earlier this month that he believes that Italy will continue the reform that it needs to achieve to restore growth potential in the economy and competitiveness. And Mr. Trichet will argue that one of the challenges facing the European institutions is the lack of confidence in national and European institutions, because the process and the adjustment process is yet to be finalized, an issue we are reminded of right now with the dealings in Cyprus. So this is fertile ground for discussion today on the question of how Europe will evolve and indeed recover. And I can think of no better speaker this morning to kick us off on the topic than Mr. Jean-Claude Trichet. So would you please join me in welcoming Mr. Trichet to the AIC.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed, Monsieur de Boissard, for this very nice presentation. And let me say that I am very happy to be here and could be at the invitation of Credit Suisse exchange of views with you on Europe. We had the privilege to meet John Major yesterday, and he authorized me to mention one of his experiences when he was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. He had a visit in the Soviet Union of the time, and he was asking for some information on the situation, the economic situation of the Soviet Union to the counterpart, which after being asked, how would you sum up the situation in one word, was reflecting and said, well, in one word, I would say good, which surprised enormously the British delegation, according to John Major. So he was asking a second question, saying, could you elaborate a little bit more in 2 words? And then his counterpart said, well, after due meditation, in 2 words, I would say no good. And you give me generously 20 to 25 minutes to mention the European issues. Concision is quite an exercise, to be clear. But let me say the following. First, I would say that we are observing since, say, 35, 40 years, a structural adaptation phenomenon all over the world. And that phenomenon has covered the entire planet. We had the Latin America change of macro policy in the 80s. We had Africa, we had the Middle East, we had the Egyptian issue, we had the Central and Eastern European issues at the end of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s. We had the Asian crisis. We are here in Asia, in vibrant Asia. We had also a crisis in Asia. And I have to say that in a way, what's happening since the start of the financial crisis is very much the turn of the advanced economy, if I may. After all emerging countries had to adapt to the new world, to the new global economy, global finance that has been created spontaneously under our eyes over the last 40 years, it was the turn, in a way, of the advanced economy. And it started with the financial crisis in 2007, 2008. Monsieur de Boissard mentioned this reaction of the ECB, of all central banks in the advanced economy, and of the governments themselves to cope with the crisis that was starting, and particularly intensively, of course, with the Lehman Brothers collapse. But after an episode which was concentrating on turbulences in the financial markets, and then the immediate and grave threat after Lehman Brothers of a collapse of the entire financial sphere in the advanced economy, then we had a third episode, if I may, or a second episode of this crisis, which was the sovereign risk crisis. And then Europe was on stage. And I would like first to respond to the question, why is it that when the crisis turned out to be a sovereign risk crisis, a country crisis, why is it that the epicenter of the crisis came in Europe, and more particularly in the euro area? And I will suggest that there was 6 reasons for that, very rapidly during the limited time that I have. 6 reasons. First reason, the Stability and Growth Pact, which was the fiscal framework that was introduced with the single currency, was not respected. We have to know that in 2003, 2004, the big countries in Europe, all big countries to be clear, including Italy, including France, including Germany, didn't want the Stability and Growth Pact to be applied to them, the sanctions to be decided against them. And that created, of course, a big, I would say, obstacle to the normal functioning of a single market with a single currency and no federal institution. It was absolutely necessary, of course, to have a full implementation of the fiscal framework, which was more or less the quid pro quo for the fact that we had no achieved political federation. That was the first reason. Second reason, we had no monitoring of the competitiveness indicators in the euro area. No monitoring of the evolution of unit labor cost. No monitoring of the evolution of the various, I would say, consequences in terms of external imbalances in particular. That was relying upon the fact that at the setting up of the euro area, the idea in the Maastricht Treaty was that the market economy would take care spontaneously of the adjustment which would be necessary as regards competitiveness, which was you know, something which could be argued, but appeared to be not satisfactory at all, because you had enormous divergences between the unit labor cost between the various countries members of the euro area. And if I may sum up, and I think it's a good summing up of the problem, when you create a single currency, nominal currency area, you have to care permanently that it remains also a single real currency area. And that, of course, go through the monitoring of the competitiveness indicators, unit labor cost in particular, but not only unit labor cost. That was the second reason. We had a third reason why the epicenter of the crisis was in the euro area, was the fact that we had no banking union. And in the crisis, it appeared that it was important that there would not be a high level of correlation between the creditworthiness of the country and the creditworthiness of the financial institutions. That appeared in all advanced economy. In all advanced economy, whether it is in the Pacific, in Asia, whether it is in the US and in the other countries in the new hemisphere, or whether it is in Europe, it appeared that the backstop for the banks, for the financial institutions, was the state itself. And therefore, there was a correlation between the creditworthiness of the state and the creditworthiness of the financial institution. But it also appeared that in the euro area, that created both a virtuous circle for those who had good signature for the state, and a vicious circle for those who had bad signature for the state. So there was an additional stretching inside the euro area, which was due to this correlation between the state and the creditworthiness of the signature of the financial institutions. So it's easily understandable that we had no banking union at the start, even if theory would have suggested that it would be appropriate for a single currency area. But the fact is that there was no such banking union, and it was a third reason I have listed for explaining the fact that the euro area had been at the center, at the epicenter of the crisis. A fourth reason was that there was no ex-ante crisis management tool which had been set up with the treaty itself, with the euro area itself. Again, it is understandable that the treaty was not envisaging that we would have at a certain moment quite soon, clearly after the start of the euro, we had to cope with the worst crisis, the worst financial crisis ever since the Second World War, which could have been the worst crisis, in my own analysis, could have been the worst crisis since World War I, had the central bank on the one hand and the governments on the other hand not responded very, very rapidly, swiftly, and boldly to the succession of events after Lehman Brothers. But again, it was understandable that we could not be lucid enough to envisage to have this crisis management tool. They did not exist. They had to be invented on the spot. And this is the fourth reason why we had this problem. It was very, very complicated, of course, to create crisis management tool when you have to deal with a decision-making process which includes 17 democracy and not a single entity, whether a centralized state or a federation, an achieved federation like the United States of America. Now, there are two other reasons that are also very important in my opinion and are dealing not with the 17, the members of the euro area, but with the 27, the member of the European Union. And those two last reasons are first, the fact that we have not achieved yet the single market itself, and in particular the single market of services, which is something which is of the responsibility of the European Union as a whole, of all members of the European Union, the 27, not only the 17 members of the euro area, but of course it has a particular importance for the euro area member because they need, in a single market with a single currency, they need, as I would say, achieved as possible, a single market, as I would say flexible as possible, the functioning of the various markets, including markets of goods and services. And this is part, of course, of the good functioning of the, I would say, flexible economy which adapt to problems stemming from difference of competitiveness and so forth. So that was a particular reason why we had difficulty in the euro area in particular, but it's a problem, again, at the level of the European Union as a whole. And the last reason was the absence of sufficient structural reforms. This also is an issue which is treated at the level of the 27. It's an issue which is treated at the level of European Union as a whole, but which of course has also a particular importance for the single currency area, because again, when you have a single currency, you need flexible economy, you need adaptation, you need the markets functioning, the labor market in particular, having the appropriate structural reforms. You need, of course, to have as vibrant as possible an economy, an integrated economy. So as you see, I see 4 reasons I listed which are specific to the euro area, 2 reasons that are specific to the 27, but of course have a particular importance for the euro area. And now what I would like to see with you is what did we do with these weaknesses? Where do we stand as European as regards the correction of those weaknesses, the correction of those particular reasons why we had a particular problem? But because again, in my own reading of the situation, I draw your attention to the fact that we are still experiencing a global problem, a global issue. We have a global issue of the sovereign states in the advanced economy that have to care for their fiscal policies, and not surprisingly, you see how the fiscal policy is important in the United States of America, in Japan, in the UK, in all advanced economy. So we all have a problem which is stemming from, I would say, policies that were not optimized in this respect, and policies that call for changes. And all our democracies are reflecting on that. But again, the problem is that with this global issue of fiscal policies and more generally of macro policies in the advanced economy, the epicenter of the crisis was particularly in Europe and more particularly in the euro area. So I take again the 6 points and see with you what is being done, what has been done, what is being done. First point, the Stability and Growth Pact. It has been reinforced considerably. So it's, we are totally, of course, in a different universe in comparison with the attitude of the countries in 2003, 2004, when I was appointed myself head of the ECB, and with my colleagues of the Governing Council, we had to fight against governments to tell them, look, you're making an enormous mistake. The Stability and Growth Pact is essential to the appropriate functioning of the euro area. So now it's totally recognized. There has been changes in what we call the secondary legislation of Europe. We have, again, reinforced considerably the Stability and Growth Pact. And to give you only one example of this, the way it has been reinforced, we have reversed the burden of the proof, if I may. Now for the governments to change the recommendation of the Commission, you have to get a qualified majority against the proposal of the Commission. So you see, it's a very, very tough change which permits to reinforce the, I would say, the teeth of the Stability and Growth Pact. This is one example. On top of that, as you know, there is a fiscal compact, which is a new treaty, which has been adopted by 25 countries, and particularly for the euro area. It is something which is of extreme importance and reinforces the monitoring and the framework of the fiscal policies all over the euro area. Second point, the absence of monitoring of competitiveness indicators. This also has been corrected. There is now a new framework which is called the macroeconomic imbalance procedure, and which precisely introduces the monitoring of competitiveness indicators in relation with the external imbalances, and particularly the current account imbalances. I consider this as absolutely essential. The ECB Governing Council considered that this was absolutely essential as soon as 2005. And we were sending messages to the governments to tell them, look very carefully at the evolution of the competitive indicators. It was long before the crisis, long before the sovereign risk crisis that we had to cope with, starting at the end of 2009, beginning 10. And it was something which was very difficult to implement because precisely we had no setup of, I would say, a framework to do that. Now we have the framework, and as I already said, I consider this monitoring of competitiveness indicator as essential to maintain a single real currency area and not only a single nominal currency area. So that second point is corrected. Of course, this is no time for complacency, and I expect that this new framework will be applied as seriously, effectively, swiftly, comprehensively as possible, because again, I consider it is absolutely essential. Then the third weakness I listed is being corrected with the supervision at the level of Europe as a whole and the euro area as a whole, in the hands of close to the ECB, close to the central bank, and we have, of course, to pursue active work in the domain of the resolution and in the domain also of other elements that are making up the banking union. As regards the crisis management tool, we had the creation of the EFSF and then the ESM, the European Stability Mechanism, which called for a treaty. So one has to understand to which extent it was not an easy process to go through 17 democracies and to set up this crisis management tool which did not exist. But it exists now, and this is something which is equally very important, I trust. The two last weaknesses I mentioned are at the level of the 27, and I would say there we have really very hard work to do and to continue to do at the level of the 27, but with a particular importance for the euro area 17. It is the single market completion on the one hand and the structural reforms. And I would insist very, very much on that, because there we are not at the level of the euro area stricto sensu, as you see. We are at the level of Europe as a whole. And I would say that Europe has certainly enormously to gain from the completion of the single market and from the structural reforms. Enormously to gain to elevate its growth potential. And growth is of the essence, and growth and job creation, of course, are of the essence for all advanced economy in a world where the emerging world is growing so brilliantly and I would say so visibly. And it's something which is of extreme importance, again, for the European as a whole. If I had a message, it would certainly be, one of the main messages would be reinforcing the structural reforms, reinforcing all the efforts in terms of creativity, innovation, R&D, education, university of excellence, and so forth. It's a very large front where we have to make enormous progress. And I have to say that when you are in Asia, you realize to which extent this is absolutely key. So you see, we are in a world where we have had a very, very important experience. We had the functioning of the euro area over quite a long period of time. We had these lessons of the worst crisis since World War II, which we had to cope with, and a number of very important decisions have been taken. That explains, I will come back in the question perhaps on what is in the headlines at the moment I'm speaking, but I want you to look at the large perspective, if I may, to see the big picture. The big picture is that the tensions that marked the past years have been alleviated considerably as regards the euro area, and my understanding of the reason why these tensions were considerably alleviated are have four dimensions, if I may. First of all, you have, of course, all the decisions I mentioned, the dramatic improvement of economic and fiscal governance in the euro area, which, again, was a process which was not easy, went through 17 democracy, took a certain time, but it is there now, and it is there very visibly. Second reason why the tensions have considerably alleviated, we have the adjustment process, which has itself gone quite swiftly. And only to give you an idea of what has been done over the last years, in terms of cost competitiveness, which is an important indicator, the unit labor cost, Ireland, for instance, has diminished its unit labor cost by 18%. So you see an immense correction in terms of competitiveness, which explains, of course, a lot in terms of improvement of the Irish situation. If I take Greece, Portugal, Spain, I have unit labor costs that have fallen by 10%, which is a big correction, and explains also a number of phenomena like exports. The exports of Ireland are very bright, as you know. The export of Spain are very dynamic. Portugal has seen from 2010 to 2012 its export augmented by 7% per year, when it was as an average 4.4 between 1999 and 2008. So you see a change which is very, very striking in terms of competitiveness and in terms of improvement of exports. And of course, not surprisingly, you see the current account, which were very, very gravely in deficit, which have made a lot of progress in those countries. If I take the 5 countries that have been under stress at a certain moment and under tensions by markets, the improvement of the position of the current account is quite spectacular. It was something like, on a consolidated basis for the 5 countries, around 8% of the GDP of deficit of the current account, consolidated deficit of the current account in 2008, 2009. It is now, if you look at the last 12 months, probably of the order of magnitude of 1 point something, 1.1, 1.2. So you see an enormous correction, and that is, of course, a very important reason why things are considered by the observer, the external observers, as totally different from the situation which took place or was taking place 2 or 3 years ago. Now you have another element which is, I think, of extreme importance also, which is the confirmation by all European democracies, without exception, both, I would say, individually and collectively, that they were very, very profoundly attached to the euro area, very attached to their strategic endeavor. And that is something which has been put in doubt at a certain moment, in my opinion, wrongly, totally wrongly, but was there. And we see now to which extent this determination, strategic determination, pursue an endeavor which started after World War II and has an historical meaning, a very profound historical meaning. So this also is taking place and has, is explaining the third reason, if I may, explaining that the perspective on the European and particularly on the euro area has changed. You see, first, the new governance. Second, the fact that adjustment is taking place. Third, the determination, the strategic determination of the European to pursue their endeavor. And fourth, you have the central bank itself telling we will we'll stand ready with the OMT to have the capacity to eliminate tail risk if that tail risk is not justified, in our opinion, because there is appropriate conditionality, appropriate adjustment, and therefore we are there to be present. That was a very credible commitment, I have to say. As you know, the ECB already intervened in the treasury market, and the fact that associated with appropriate conditionality, the central bank was there, was also one element, but only one element amongst the four I have listed. It is this convergence of reasons that put us in a situation which is, again, a situation of alleviation of the tensions. But this is no time for complacency in any respect. All this has to be implemented, and as we know, and as you all know, of course, it is work in progress. And it's not surprising that from time to time we have here and there, with the 17 democracies have been mentioning, issues that appear here and there. But it would be an enormous mistake, in my opinion, to confuse a road which is from time to time bumpy with the direction that the Europeans have. And again, not mixing up, if I may, the tree and the forest is extremely important. And again, if I have also another message, it would certainly be that very strong message. Now, I know that there is a session of question and answers. I have to let the time for the question and answers. Let me only mention as a conclusion that, as I said, this is no time for complacency. In my opinion, it is absolutely essential to implement all what has been decided as swiftly, comprehensively, and effectively as is necessary, and also to reflect on the future. And it seems to me that we have two avenues that we have to reflect upon. One is be sure that all this de facto political union that is being created with the formidable improvement of fiscal and economic governance I have already mentioned, is accompanied, as I would say, completely as possible, with democratic accountability. It is extremely important because we are improving governance, therefore we are necessarily deepening political union, at least in the domain of economic and fiscal fields. We have to be sure that this is accompanied by democratic accountability, which calls for the European Parliament to have more and more influence. These members of the European Parliament are elected by universal polling, and as you know, there will be election this year. So this is a very important rendezvous for the European democracy as a whole. And in my opinion, we also have to reflect on the longer term and on which kind of, I would say, democratic political union, effective and democratic political union we will have in the future. And I stand ready to respond to questions on this area too. But let me say that I was very, very impressed because you listened to me very carefully. And this is something which is of great importance, I have to say, when you are speaking in Asia of Europe today. And now let me say how impressed I am to be in Asia and conclude on that. I was myself in China negotiating a treaty in 82, 83. There was not a single high rise in Peking at that time. And when you're back in Asia in general and China in particular, it is absolutely fascinating to see the progress which were made. It reminds me the say of Václav Havel, you know, the previous president of the Czech Republic. He was saying, and of course he was thinking of all the historical evolution in all domains, he said things have happened so rapidly that we had even no time to be astonished. And it captures what's happening now at the global level and perhaps also at the Asian level. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Trichet, for your remarks. It is a very broad topic. We appreciate your perspective on the lessons learned and some thoughts for the future. I know there will be a lot of questions in the audience. I will start us with one. You mentioned the difficulty of distinguishing the bumps in the road versus the long-term effort and trajectory. We've recently had the Cyprus discussions, and could you help us with your perspectives on that current event and how it is to be seen in the perspective of time?
Well, this is a very good example, obviously, of, as you said, of a bump on the road or a tree, which should not be confused with the forest. I would only say that we are all observing what is going on, and particularly when I was mentioning the functioning of our democracies, we see in real time the functioning of our democracies in these circumstances. Only a few orders of magnitude to understand a little bit the peculiarity of this issue. The banking system, the consolidated balance sheets of the banks represents approximately 700% of the GDP. So this is something really special in terms of size, relative size of the banking system and of the GDP. The GDP itself is extremely small. It's 17 billion euros. That's the GDP of the country. And I have to say that it's a very, I would say, peculiar case and a very peculiar work in progress with the idea that the European do not want to let Cyprus alone. They stand ready to help. They have decided that they would mobilize all external support would represent an enormous proportion of the GDP of the country. If I'm not misled, it would be something like 60% of the GDP of the country, the loans that would be mobilized to help. So I wanted you to have this order of magnitude in mind when you observe what is going on. I have no other, at this stage, I have no other, I would say, remark than those. Again, don't confuse the tree and the forest, first. And second, look at the situation as really an extraordinary case, which in terms of proportion is really, as I said a moment ago, very, very special. So I cannot only express my own sentiment. The idea of whatever finally is decided by both, I would say, the Cyprus and all its partners, whatever is finally decided, I am confident that there is no element of contagion that would be dramatic, quote unquote, in the circumstances. That's my own analysis. But again, at this stage, I suggest that we look very carefully at what is going on. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we take questions from the audience? Can we get some microphones?
Thank you. Talking about balance sheets, the ECB's has grown quite dramatically over the past 5 years. Aren't you afraid that by playing the fireman, the ECB will somehow burn itself? Thank you.
Thank you. It's a very good question. And you know my own understanding that we are experiencing an issue which is the issue for the advanced economy, and I would say for all the advanced economy. So if you look at the balance sheets of the major central bank in the advanced economy, you will see that they are all, they have all considerably increased. And perhaps the paradox of the situation is that if you take the balance sheets at the moment of the start of the crisis, say you take the balance sheets of the various central banks immediately before Lehman Brothers, and you look at their size today, the balance sheets of the Fed, the balance sheet of the Bank of England, have augmented more than the balance sheet of the ECB. So again, we have a general issue, a very, very important global issue, which is, and of course I could have mentioned Japan too, even if Japan started, if I may, before this crisis. And when you look at Japan, you see now that it's a precursor of what will happen or would happen to the other advanced economies. It's very, very interesting to replace the Japanese evolution in that global context. So what is it that all advanced economies are relying very much upon their central bank to substitute to an intermediation of the commercial banks and of financial institutions in general, an intermediation also of the markets that is not functioning normally. And it reinforced my own analysis according to which what we are experiencing is an episode of structural adaptation of the advanced economy, which is more or less the equivalent of what happened in the emerging world during the last 30 years. We have to adapt, we have to adjust, and it's, of course, as always, an exercise which is not easy. The central banks are justified in doing what they do, in particular their non-standard measure, and you know that they are not the same for the ECB and for the Fed, for instance. The Fed intervenes massively on markets. The ECB intervenes massively on refinancing commercial banks, which is easily understandable because the financing of the US economy is massively financing through markets. Perhaps 75, 80% of the financing of the US economy goes through markets, when in Europe it is massively financing through banks. And I would say that 75% perhaps of the overall financing of the European economy goes through banks. And it is not surprising then that the non-standard measure of the two central banks are concentrating on what is important for, more important for the financing of their economy. But again, it's a very large question, as you see, a question of extreme importance, but a question for, I would say, all advanced economy and all central banks. And the paradox, perhaps, of the situation is that even if the Europeans are at the epicenter of the crisis, all taken into account, the size of the non-standard measure that are taken in Europe seems, at least looking at the balance sheet of the central bank, not I would say, superior to what is done by the others, on the contrary. But that being said, let's not neglect that the ECB major non-standard measure consists in supplying liquidity on an unlimited basis at fixed rate, provided, of course, you have appropriate collateral. But the fact that this is unlimited is something which is started at the very beginning of the crisis. We took that decision. Monsieur de Boissard was mentioning that in his very nice introduction. It was the 9th of August 2007 that for the first time we decided that we would supply liquidity. At the time it was for 24 hours only, but on an unlimited basis at fixed rate. The fixed rate at the time was 4%.
Thank you. Gentleman here.
Yeah, you talked about Europe. I would like to have your future outlook for Europe. And the other question is that you talked about countries which have done good reforms and labor costs get cut down. What's about France? What they have to do, and in which situation are they now compared to what has to be done in Europe?
Well, I think that the message for all the Europeans, namely structural reforms, are of the essence, is certainly a message for France in particular, and particularly, I have to say, in the domain of markets in general, labor market in particular. As you might know, there has been a negotiation between social partners, and that negotiation has to be confirmed at the level of the parliament. So there is a very important step which is taking place right now, which is the new legislation passing in front of the parliament, which will introduce a number of improvements which are very, very important and overdue in terms of functioning of the labor market in particular. Another element which is very important also for all countries, I have to say, because I mentioned a number of progress, but I said also no time for complacency. This is work in progress. As you might know, France had pursued over the years 80s and 90s a strategy which was called competitive disinflation. And I was myself very instrumental in, I would say, working out and applying this strategy. The idea was you have a very good monitoring of your cost, of your revenue, of your national inflation in order to consolidate competitiveness. And this is the appropriate way, of course, to gain growth and job creation. It worked. If we have the euro, it is in particular because that strategy worked. At the end of the 90s, the current account of France was positive, and the trade was good. At that time, Germany had the reunification, so had lost competitiveness, and we were in a situation where Germany had a current account deficit, which is not frequent for Germany. Since the beginning of the 2000s, Germany pursued a strategy of, I would say, competitive stability, which has been very, very efficient. And unit labor costs have improved and improved and improved in Germany over time. And I would say that Germany more or less spontaneously was more or less doing what had been done by my own country before in the 90s and the 80s. And now we have to concentrate on regaining competitiveness, in my opinion, not only with a shock of competitiveness, which is the usual expression in my country, but with not only the shock, but on top of the shock, a real strategy, which I would call, again, a strategy of competitive stability over time in order to consolidate competitiveness. So you see, structural reforms and competitiveness are, I would say, absolutely of the essence. But this is true for all countries, and of course, particularly true because your question was on France, also for France.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. The gentleman.
We're seeing a lot of talk about central banks moving their monetary targets. One of the ideas coming around is switching to looking at nominal GDP. I was just wondering what your views on these potential changes are.
I would say that I personally, because your question is a personal question, I personally think that it remains of extreme importance that the central banks are keen to concentrate on the price stability as a condition, not the sole condition, but a condition for growth and job creation, together with structural reforms, together with the necessary adjustment when and where necessary. Why do I think that? Because, again, of course, in this perception, I would say one has to be symmetrical. So, and one thing where I think we can be quite positive on what has been done by the ECB is that the anchoring of inflation expectation has been quite remarkable, immediately below 2%, below 2, close to 2. And even when we had an immediate threat of deflation, the dedication of the central bank to price stability was so strong that we never had the inflation expectations plunging down and creating a real threat of materializing the deflation possibility, which, of course, would have been very, very dramatic. So my sentiment is that sticking to this position, which is we are determined to avoid inflation, but we are equally determined to avoid deflation, is something, of course, it's the responsibility of the Governing Council and of my successor, but it's something which I trust remains of extreme importance. And you have also to price in the fact that the democratic mandate which has been given by all democracies to the ECB is to deliver price stability. I think that in terms of confidence, and you know that confidence is one of the most important ingredients for the economy in general, for growth, for job creation. And one of the major problems we probably have at the moment I'm speaking in the advanced economy, in all advanced economy, is a problem of relative absence of sufficient confidence in the household, in the entrepreneur's constituency, in the investors and savers. So it's a problem of extreme importance. In the case of the European, where the democracies have said we want price stability, and again with this conception, with this very strong idea that it has to be symmetric and you have to care for avoiding the deflationary risk as much as is necessary if there is a threat of materialization of that risk. But for the European, I think for the confidence of the European, it would be important to preserve this credibility, which is remarkably intact at the moment I'm speaking of stability. But again, it's not the only condition, of course, for growth prosperity. And on top of that, I would say that the non-standard measure of the central bank, again, are part of the tools that the central bank has. The ECB has been the first central bank to embark on non-standard measure, the 9th of August 2007. So it's not that we are shy, it's not that we are timid, but we are, I think, rightly so, extremely determined to deliver price stability. By the way, and I conclude on that, if you permit me, I think it would be appropriate to reflect more on the standard measures on the one hand, non-standard measures on the other hand. Standard measures, interest rates. Is it reasonable to say that the zero interest rates are necessary to do non-standard measures, and that as long as you are doing non-standard measures, you have quantitative easing or whatever non-standard measure, you have to have zero interest rates? I doubt that. I would prefer that we have a separation principle, non-standard measures on the one hand, which are designed to correct the absence of correct functioning of markets, difficulty in the transmission of the monetary policy and so forth. This is something which is important, I trust. And the interest rates themselves have to be designed to permit the delivery of price stability over time. Credible delivery of price stability over time, of course, avoiding inflation, avoiding deflation. That would be an avenue I would suggest to reflect upon because again, we are speaking of problems that are very important problems, very important issues at the level of all advanced economy. Thank you.